My name is Catherine Lamar, and it is my pleasure today to be interviewing John Rose Jr. Today's date is the 31st of March, 2023, and I am conducting this interview as part of the Connecticut Bar Foundation's History of Attorneys of Color project. I have known John Rose for about 30 years. We've worked together, we've known each other, we've enjoyed parties together. We've worked together at 2 different locations, and we've worked together on bar association matters and other things of interest. So, John, we have a little bit of time to talk. So let's start with your early life.
Okay, I was born in Falmouth, Massachusetts, actually a piece of Falmouth in the East End that was called T-Ticket. It's a corruption of an Indian word, Tataket. But anyway, I was born at home in my parents' house in T-Ticket on September 26, 1940. I was the second child in the family. My sister, who was the only one of the 12 children my parents had who was not still alive, was the only one that preceded me. So I'm now the senior most child in my family.
So what was it like growing up with 10 siblings, or 11 siblings, in a portion of a smallish town in Massachusetts on Cape Cod?
It was, thank God it was Cape Cod. The one wonderful thing, obviously, is we had the ocean. We never went to camp because we, quote unquote, were at camp in the summertime, and people came to visit the Cape.
My dad used that same excuse. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, what the heck. We were po, I used to say, as opposed to being poor. We couldn't afford the OR. We were in a very, very small house that actually had 3.5 rooms. At some point, my father, who was literally a do-it-all, he was a plumber when he needed to be, he was an electrician when he needed to be, he was a carpenter when he needed to be, he was a fabulous baseball player. He decided he was going to expand the house at one point, and he built an addition which was never insulated. As kids, we called it the other side. We would sleep there 2/3 of the year. In the wintertime, not happening. You'd put your bed in the kitchen and you'd survive. We didn't have electricity until I was 8 or 9. We didn't have an indoor toilet till I was 10-ish. So it was pretty primitive living. What poor people, quote unquote, in that part of the world had, though, is they had land. We had almost 2 acres of land. My father could make a plank row by pushing his thumb down into a piece of furniture. He put a greenhouse in the bottom yard in our property, built a little house for the greenhouse, put a furnace in it, ran pipes through the greenhouse, so he was growing flowers all year round. He was an amazing, interesting, different, difficult, fun guy.
And your mom?
She was beyond special. Neither of my parents graduated high school. Both of them had lost both of their parents by the time they were 10. So they were raised by other family members, aunts, uncles, in the Falmouth area. My mother was actually born in Cape Verde, in an island called Brava. And she came here when she was 3 years old. Her father sailed a sailboat from Cape Verde to New Bedford. And she relocated to Falmouth, met my father when she was a teenager. I think one of the photographs that I have is the 2 of them when they were teenagers. So, but, it was a different kind of a life growing up there. Falmouth was small-ish, but I never knew racism. Nobody ever called me a nigger my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
But we were black, and we survived being patrons of the small town of Falmouth.
And yours was not the only large family
Oh, no.
in Falmouth.
There were two families in our town with 22 kids each, one father, one mother. So there were a lot of large families. My father's brother had 10 children. His sister, who never had any children, was the favorite aunt of everybody's. She lived to be 100. My father lived to 94. My mother to 84. My mother had, they had, as I said, they had very little education, but my mother read libraries. She didn't read books, she read libraries, and she taught me. I learned how to read when I was 3, sitting on my father's knee, and he'd be watching cartoons or reading cartoons or reading the sports page, and I'd sit on his knee and I learned to read. I could read by the time I was 3.
And so your parents inspired you to read, to learn.
Work hard, to work very hard, and bring all the money home. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember a story you telling about shoveling snow.
People have to know the Cape to believe this, but every major winter storm that hits Boston, and Boston gets all this press about how badly it snowed, every one of those storms hits the Cape first. We had a house that was set back 2 telephone poles from the main street, which was called Sandwich Road in T-Ticket. And when the snows came, we had one snowstorm where we literally built an igloo, something that you can relate to, and you could
Yes.
go in and out of it. But we'd have to shovel that driveway down to the street. And since we didn't have gloves, God forbid, we used to put socks on our hands, and we had lots of shovels.
So
because
that's
we had
why
farming
it's
equipment.
good to have 11 siblings.
It is. Work charms. Yeah.
Many
it's
hands
wonderful.
make light
And,
the work.
there is that.
So can you talk a little bit about school in Falmouth?
I went to a small elementary school in T-Ticket, where I went from kindergarten to the 6th grade. In the 4th grade, I remember the principal, who was also he was the principal of the school, and he taught math or general math to the 6th graders. He came in and he hauled me out of the 4th grade class and took me into the 6th grade class and had me do a math problem that apparently the 6th graders were having trouble with. It's the kind of thing that get you beat up in my hometown, but that didn't happen. I had 6 brothers, so when we decided that we were not fighting each other, not too many people messed with us.
And then high school.
I went to a school that my father helped build. It was called Lawrence Junior Senior High School in Falmouth. I went from 7th grade there to the 12th grade, and I think there were, in my graduating class, I think there were 116 of us. That school is now a junior high school, and the main high school is much, much larger, and their classes graduate 450 kids in Falmouth in this day and age.
So, I mean, what encouraged you to become a lawyer? Well, no, let's go back. When you were thinking about going to college, who encouraged you to do that, and what did they do?
In my junior year, I and several of the more decent students put together a college club, and we started writing schools like Boston University and Northeastern and Boston College. And they literally would invite us to come to Boston to go to football games, to walk the campus. That was fun. I guess at some point, maybe junior year. Let me take you back a little bit. I ran for secretary of my freshman class, with my slogan being, "You don't have to be a girl to be secretary." And by the time I got to the senior year, I decided I was going to become president of my class. There'd never been a black president of a class in any Falmouth school, and I won. So I was involved with the student council. We did all kinds of interesting, wonderful stuff. There were some wickedly bright young people in my class. There was a doctor's son who did Harvard and Harvard Medical School. There was a phenomenal golfer from our school who went to Notre Dame, who today has the course record of the course where we used to caddy, because that's one of the ways we made money. He shot a 62, which is like stupid. It's so
Yeah,
wonderful.
I don't know golf.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's okay. I like golf. I was a halfway decent golfer, played on the high school golf team a little bit. But we were so good. We were state champions 3 years in a row. We went out
Wow.
to, we played Tabor Academy, which is, ta-da, all kinds of wealthy young people. They have a sailboat where they teach the young men to play. They're all white. They have a course in Marion, Massachusetts, where they played the U.S. Open in the 30s. That's the quality. I beat that kid to death in the tournament that we played.
Of course.
Of course. So anyway, my senior year English teacher had worked at Dartmouth in some capacity. I don't know where he came from, but he came to Falmouth to teach. He had wonderful teachers, just spectacular teachers. This tiny little town with this tiny little school, spectacular teachers. And the superintendent had gone to Dartmouth. So they got interested in me. They actually created a scholarship committee to send me to college, to Dartmouth, or wherever I was going to go. I applied to all the schools in in Boston, Harvard, Northeastern, Boston University. Got into Harvard, got into Dartmouth. Harvard gave me more money, and I said at 18 and a half, I've been to Boston. So I think that was why I rejected Harvard, although the person they sent to interview me from Harvard was some old dude with a funny little jacket and a little hat. I mean, it's like, duh. The guy who interviewed me from Dartmouth was a doctor in Hyannis, cool guy. So anyway, I went to Dartmouth. Class of 1963, 750 young men, 2 blacks. Me and a guy named Floyd Peterson. Class after me, 1.
So let's talk about your Dartmouth years. You using your words, Poe
Yeah, all kinds of money.
from Falmouth.
had-
They gave you all kinds of money.
Yeah, thank God. But I worked my tail off in 2 or 3 jobs. In the course that I was there, always worked in the dining room. I could take the 3 plates in one hand and spread them out into that plastic container before you put it in the dishwasher. I got real good at that. The story of the drive to Dartmouth is one of the great experiences of my life, knowing my father. He didn't like going over the bridge, so it was a big deal. So he calls up his
The Bourne Bridge?
the Bourne Bridge, yes. He didn't like, well, no,
I don't
we
blame
barely
him.
did that. Anyway, we get in the car. His godson is driving. His godson's girlfriend is there, and I've got all my luggage and stuff, and I'm going off to Dartmouth College. Never been there before. We got on the highway, drove to Boston, looked up, and there was a sign that said New Hampshire. We went directly to Portsmouth, which is on the other side of the state from Hanover. We left at 5:30 in the morning, and we arrived in Hanover, New Hampshire at 8:30 at night. And they promptly turned around and left me right there, and there I was.
My parents just dropped me at the airport and said bye.
But Dartmouth was a good place for me. I grew up a lot there. By the way, even though I grew up on the Cape, I've never learned how to swim. And the first week that you're a student at Dartmouth, remember it was all men back then, you take a physical agilities course where you climb a 30-foot rope, do a standing broad jump, run an obstacle course, and swim 50 yards in less than a minute. I did all the stuff all the way up to the swimming part, so I had to engage in taking swimming lessons at the 25-yard pool, which is all Dartmouth had back then, from the teacher was this kid who'd been in the Olympics for some European country. He was about as tolerant of my capacity because I jumped in the water. If I raised my head, my feet went down, or my legs went down. I was fearless, but I could drown, and almost did. One day, the course, by the way, was 8 o'clock in the morning. I lived a mile from the dining room. It was another quarter of a mile to the gym. Never missed breakfast in 4 years, and went directly to the gym after. Took off all your clothes. You were doing it nude because you were all men at that point. I took a kickboard and jumped out into the pool, and I was twiddling along. One day I just let go of the board and went right to the bottom and stayed there.
Oh my.
And a young African man, whose name I will never forget, Ephraim Anabuna, who couldn't swim, but who was there, was the only one paying attention to what this idiot was doing at the bottom of the pool. He dove in and pulled me out. So I finally one day managed to do 25 yards, most of it running on the bottom if the pool wasn't too deep. 2 years after I started Dartmouth, I passed the 25 yards in less than a minute thing. I was not a good student the first 2 years. Then I discovered the part of the library where nobody went except me. I was up in the highest part of the library. I found a table with a lamp, and I turned my entire education around. I went from Dartmouth was on a 5-point program back then. An A was 5 down through an F. And my average the first couple of years was a little over 2 coming to 3. I got a letter the first summer saying, we're not used to giving this kind of money to somebody with these kinds of grades. So I decided to straighten myself out, found myself a wonderful place to study, and my last 2 years I had like somewhere between a 4.4 and a 4.7. So
wow, good for you. What was your major?
Sociology. I wanted to be a criminologist.
Why?
I have no idea, but I must have read about it somewhere. I can remember when I was doing the kind of reading that I did in high school. There was a guy who was called a phrenologist who would go take measures of people's heads and determine sociologically that there would be bad guys or good guys. I thought, oh, that was interesting. Dartmouth had a phenomenal head of the sociology department who was a criminologist. He wrote a book called Society of Captives. He was an artist. He played the saxophone. He was really a cool guy. So, I was going to be him or whatever. Then I got into political science in a big way. They had phenomenal political science department, 2 wonderful professors, one of whom taught Latin American politics. And began one class with talking about Chile and saying, remember this old young man, Chile, I remember that's where I lost my virginity. Well, he had everybody's attention at that point. It was a wonderful school. Sadly, it didn't have enough black people, but it's good now. We got black sororities, black fraternities. I go back for every reunion. The other black man in my class is dead. So everybody knows me, and all I know is I look at all these old white men who I don't know, and they keep saying, John. We're coming up to my 60th this year, this June.
So you made friends when you were in college easily? Yeah.
Yeah, easily. Yep. My roommate was a hotshot from Evanston, Illinois, Evanston Township. He was one of the cheerleaders. Back then, Dartmouth still had the Indian, because we're the Indians or whatever, and he was part-time the Indian for the football games. But I had lots and lots and lots of very good friends, most all of whom were white, and Floyd Peterson and Stan Roman and I were inseparable.
Why did you decide to go to law school?
I think I always wanted to go to law school, always meaning once I got to college and decided that I was going to major in this and major in that I was going to apply to law school someplace. And then I had that wonderful interview with the dean at Yale, because I wanted to go to Yale. I didn't want to go to Harvard. That's an interesting other story, because one of the most important people in my life was a guy whose father created Stop and Shop. And he had gone to Harvard undergrad and Harvard Law School. We became close friends. When I graduated Dartmouth, he said, I want to write you a letter because I want you to go to Harvard Law School. I didn't apply to Harvard Law School. But on the day that the letters came out telling people that they'd been admitted, my roommate, they'd created this phenomenal facility all the way across campus. Walking was, miles we would walk every day and not even think about it. But anyway, he came back and said, there's a piece of mail for you from Yale, and it's thick. Well, back in those days, maybe even in these days, that's the biggie, because if you get a thin envelope, you're done. If you get a thick envelope, it means they, oops, God forbid, accepted you. So yeah, I got into Yale Law School, class of 1966. 7 black people in that class, some spectacular people. Haywood Burns, who was Mandela's lawyer, who represented, what's her face with the big afro?
Angela Davis?
Angela Davis, when she was arrested on the East Coast and on the West Coast. Henry Richardson. We got special people.
I'll have to tell you my Angela Davis story, but we'll keep going.
So anyway, I get into Yale Law School, and I'm working that summer at an Air Force base. I had 2 jobs. I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and hitchhike from my parents' house to Otis Air Force Base, which was probably 7 or 8 miles. By the way, it was a very significant Air Force Base. Most people don't appreciate that there could be such a thing on Cape Cod, but John F. Kennedy flew into Otis all the time when he was president and when his family was in Hyannisport. But they were building B-52 bomber hangars on Otis Air Force Base. My father, who worked in concrete or related to either road building or building buildings his whole life, used to take me to the airport, and we would sit and watch concrete set in rooms that were big, just giant buildings where they were going to put B-52 bombers. Concrete you have to keep the temperature at a certain level. That was my father's job, was to make sure that the temperature stayed at the right place. So anyway, I used to hitchhike to the airport, or go to work. I worked in a dining room. I was a short order cook or a salad cook or a dessert cook, and worked from 4:30 to 2. Hitchhiked to get there. Never had problems getting a ride because I was in whites going to and from the airport, from the air base. I had a second job that summer working in Woods Hole at the Oceanographic, which is a very famous place, obviously. And I used to go from Otis Air Force Base to Woods Hole. It's probably 11 miles with my thumb out. Never late. My first job there was being interviewed by the woman who'd hired me, and she took me down to the beach, and she said, in this enclosed fenced area, there's a tennis court under there, find it and keep it. It was right near a beach, so all the water that brought all the sand up was 2 or 3 feet deep. I had a wheelbarrow and a shovel. I found the tennis court, kept that one. There was a second tennis court, beautiful clay court right across the street from the entrance to the Oceanographic, which I also maintained that summer. That was, you did that kind of work. It was good work. I was the son in my family with the soft hands, which is a whole other story, which hopefully we'll get to when we talk about what my father's union tried to do to him after I graduated law school. But anyway, there was Yale. So I'm sitting there, and I got this letter from Yale that said, that dorm room that we promised you, it's gone. So you need to get to New Haven and find yourself someplace to live. I've never been in New Haven. I've been to Boston and been to New York several times while I was an undergrad, but I'd never been to New Haven. I asked some guys who were members of the Air Force for a ride to New Haven, and turned out a bunch of them were literally going to, as it turned out, a gang fight in New Haven, and they gave me a ride. They stopped at a store on the way, and 2 of them went in and kept the clerk busy while 3 of them pickpocketed the store. It was like, I'm going to law school. But anyway, I think we made New Haven in less time than it's allowed. I know we never drove less than 95 miles an hour where you could do that. And they actually passed New Haven and left me off almost in West Haven, so I'm walking back. I've never been good at packing, so I always had too much luggage. Anyway, I'm going into New Haven to try to find a place to live. Started to rain that day. I arrived on a Friday. I was going to go down to the Yale the Yale housing place and get their list and start finding myself a place to live. I got there on Elm Street, to a place I know very well now, and I went in and they gave me the list of places that I could go look, and I think I learned to say, we don't rent to colored in at least 3 languages that weekend, most of which it was raining and pouring on me. So I went back home and I wrote a nasty letter to the dean of admissions and said, you got to find me some place to live, and they did. So I got into Yale Law School and attended in the fall of 1963.
And how far off campus was this place to live?
The first place was a piece of cake. I mean, you know New Haven well. Law school's here, Temple Street, where the library is, right here. I was right there, so it was a very short walk. My second year, by that time I'd become very friendly with a guy named Henry Richardson, who was a professor at Temple for years, married to Renee Poussin, whose uncle wrote the Black Child book back in the day. Anyway, we decided that we were going to live together, but we knew better than to try to go out and find housing on our own, God forbid. So we drafted a young Jewish guy who was a good friend. Don Congress was his name, kid from New York who'd gone to the Colorado School of Mines undergraduate work. Interesting guy. Anyway, we found a place way out near the bowl, spectacular little building. It was the top story of a 3-story building, store on the bottom. And we moved in there, and within a week or 10 days' time, we got a telephone call from the woman who owned the building, whose son had the store on the bottom, and she was very disappointed because she had no idea that they were renting to 2 young blacks. So she lived in Hamden, and she invited Hank and I to go out and meet her. And we sat with this lady with our pinkies extended, drinking tea in her house, and sold her on us being the best thing that ever happened to her since sliced bread.
So John, let's talk about the second place you lived in New Haven.
Oh yes. It was probably, let me think, 3 bedrooms, a very large kitchen, gigantic kitchen, with a pantry that you walk through when there's shelving on both sides. And
Oh, a butler's pantry. Very la-di-da.
Hank Richardson was a very interesting young man. His father was a very famous lawyer in Indiana who'd been to the U.S. Supreme Court at least twice. Hank had spent a lot of time in Europe, especially in France. He was a night owl. So Don Congress and I decided we had adjoining bedrooms. The kitchen was here. The living room was here. There was this set of French doors into a room which was not Hank's room. The bedroom was just another room. And his bedroom was off of that. So we put him over there. Anyway, we stayed there for the 2 years, and at some point we planned on having a party. And at this point we were 3 young law students. We decided to put on this party. And back in those days, Macy's and Mally's was downtown in New Haven, remember? And I put myself in charge of making the punch for the party. And it was a rum punch. And I think I want to say it had several kinds of rum in it, but I'm not sure of that. It was a big deal, and you cut it supposedly with champagne. I cut it with soda water or whatever that stuff is. But I remember my best friend from Dartmouth Stan Roman, came up to the party early, got into the punch before I cut it, and they found him sitting on the kitchen floor talking to a dog.
So how did your nice landlady from Hamden?
Oh, she loved us. Once she met us, and we went through the little sipping of the tea and sticking out your pinky with her, she was wonderful.
So she was fine with this party?
She didn't know anything about the party.
Oh, okay.
Party was my third year. Was well into our tenure at her apartment house. It's not there. I mean, I drive. I was corporation counsel in New Haven.
Yes.
So I drive that street, and the store's gone. It's probably been converted into apartments. Yale was a fabulous law school, needless to say. The president of our class was a black woman who went to Stanford undergrad. She was from New York. Yale Law School, graduates 1966, applies to law firms. No law firm in America was giving a job to a black woman then. She led trips to Italy for 3 years. And she found a job as the Assistant Attorney General in Anchorage, Alaska, which you can relate to.
I know who that is. Oh my gosh.
Carolyn, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, okay. She's still there. She's retired from there. She writes the notes on our class's stuff to this day. But she was really cool. I mean, Carolyn would come and bring candelabra to the law school dining room. So we'd have dinner. Everybody wanted to be Carolyn's
She's from
friend.
Alaska. Of course she has class.
But law school was cool. About moot court. There's an event in law school called moot court at Yale. It involves real judges, 3 of them from either some appellate division or state court judges, and you argue a case to them. My opponent was a guy from Davidson. His initials were K. Kendrick K. Kelly III. At the Southern schools then, and maybe even today, they teach young men, because it was all men back then, they teach them debate. I'd never taken a debate class in my life. I had the law on my side. I had the facts on my side. He kicked my butt because he was good at arguing. And I mean, it didn't make any sense to me that his arguments were being listened to by these judges, but he destroyed me. The story of Ken is one of the sad stories in my history. Kendrick K. Kelly, having graduated Davidson, now Yale Law School, class of 1966, was a second lieutenant. He went into the Army, I believe it was, and he said he wanted to go to Vietnam and fight, and people looked at him like, no, you're a stupidly bright young man with a Yale law degree. We're going to put you in, intelligence or whatever. He somehow finagled his way into flying helicopters in Vietnam. He was shot down and killed there. We became very good friends in law school. I had a lot of really wonderful, good friends in law school who've accomplished miraculous things, like the Zagats were in my class. The little sign that says, this is a restaurant rated by the Zagats. Well, Tim and Nina were in my class. And about midway through their second year, they got married and decided that they were going to do a whole lot more with the law. She went off and practiced divorce law at a big, giant New York firm, and he went in and did something else at a big, giant law firm. And they decided that they'd rather be rating restaurants around the world, and now that's what they do. The Zagats are still members of my class. They were at the last reunion. They're wonderful people. Yale was a very special place to go to law school. Small, intense, phenomenal teachers. It was a good time.
And you worked while you were in school.
Oh, I had at least 2 jobs. As you know, I waited table again. That's another story we're going to get to in a minute. And I worked at a Legal Assistance Association office in the Dixwell Newhall office, where I met a young black lawyer who'd gone to Yale. His name was Leander Charles Gray. Leander was born in the South somewhere. He was rescued by his grandmother and taken to Cleveland, Ohio, where he grew up on the street with a gun and a knife. At 17, he decided to go into the Army. Did 3 years in the Army and just said when he got out, well, I could go back to the street with my gun and my knife, or I could go to college. He went to Howard Law School, something that you know a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, Howard undergrad rather. He was in the what's called the Howard Players, which was one of the finest Shakespeare troupes in the country back then. So he became a Shakespearean actor. Smart as hell, very handsome guy, big, and one of the best lawyers I've ever known. I used to tell people that Leander's idea of a full night's sleep was 15 minutes at his desk. He trained me to be as good a lawyer as I could be. We were practicing criminal law back then because LIA had criminal jurisdiction, and we taught more state's attorneys about the Supreme Court rules on search and seizure than you can imagine. So I worked there for 2 years while I was in law school and waited table, and then I suppose I should do the waited table story.
Well, yeah, you've had a wonderful life with respect to your time in Falmouth, your time at Dartmouth, and in your time at Yale, where you made wonderful friends and were accepted wherever you went. But that wasn't
this day.
Completely charmed.
On this day, I was in the early spring of my senior year. I was waiting breakfast, which made eminent good sense because one, you got all of your meals from Monday to Saturday, and you only worked an hour and a half. And I started at 6:30, and I always had 8 o'clock classes at law school. The trick was you had to be in your seat by 8:10. So on this day, it's late in the morning, or I'm cleaning my tables. It's after the 8 o'clock bell has rung, such as it is. And this kid comes in, big guy. He was a freshman law student. He'd gone to Notre Dame. He was from Long Island. He came in, he was late. It was 8:03. I'm doing because I got to clean my tables, eat my breakfast, and get in class, all in 10 minutes. Anyway, I went over to him and I said, what do you want? Because I wasn't, he was a freshman. I didn't care what he thought or knew. And he said to me, I've been waiting I said, I saw you when you came in. I know what time it is, and you know what time it is. And I went on cleaning my tables, and he's getting louder. So I ignored him. He gave me his order. I went into the kitchen. You go in one door, go around, pick up the food and the orange juice glass, go around the other side, there's another door. I got to the second door, and he's standing in the doorway. He had his books in this hand. He's 6'2", maybe 180, 190 pounds, whatever. And he looked at me, so I'm standing there, his plate in this hand, glass of orange juice in this hand, glasses on. He looked at me and he said, I stopped throwing rocks at peasants a long time ago. And then he reared back, dropped his books, and punched me right in the face, knocked this tooth to God knows where. I went back into a pile of dishes. It was like a Western movie. I recovered myself, went at him. A bunch of people grabbed us and put us apart, thank God for me. Later that day, I get a call from the dean, and he wants me to know that Mr. X is sitting in his office. He's crying. He's very apologetic, and the school's going to take care of my dental bills, but the school would rather that I didn't sue the young man. I said, I'm going to sue that bastard. So that tooth cost him $10,000 back in the day. Yeah, he was afflicted. But anyway, most of the law school experience was very positive.
And after graduating from law school, what was your first job?
Well, I had worked two summers or 2 years at the LAA office in New Hallville. Dixwell New Hall is a separate part of the world in New Haven. And I was the clerk, and the job was there for me to become the lawyer if I wanted to do that. There's an aside that comes here. I went to high school, never got a driver's license. Went to college, never got a driver's license. Went to law school, never got a driver's license. Graduated law school, did not have a car or a driver's license. I rode a bike or I walked everywhere. So suddenly, I'm the only lawyer in this established legal services office in New Hallville. And I mean, I lived downtown. It was probably 3 miles anyway to the New Hallville office, easy. I used to walk it all the time, it was no big deal. But the day came, of course, where I had a case out of town. It was in Hamden. It was a motor vehicle case involving a black man who didn't have a license, had committed several infractions which caused the police to arrest him. I had to get to Hamden, so I took a bus, knew nothing about buses, didn't know what the schedule said which one I had to take. Bus stop maybe a mile from the courthouse. I jumped off with my little briefcase and walked a mile to the courthouse. Presented my case, believe it or not, to a judge whose name was Wise. He fined my client and took the fine back. I guess he liked my argument, I don't know. So there I am in Hamden. I got to get back to my office, and my client looked at me and said, "Do you need a ride?"
Your client without a driver's license.
Yeah, right. Well, then I decided I got to get a car. So Hugh Price, who's relatively famous in history, he was head of the National Urban League at one point. He was in my class. He drove me out to some place in New Haven, and I bought a Volkswagen and taught myself how to drive a stick. I would go to the office either by taxi or bus. No, never took a taxi. Bus or walk for as long as it took me to learn how to drive and learn the book and take my exam and pass it and become a driver.
Yeah, I've been in a car with you, John.
We go quickly.
Very quickly. So eventually, you gained the attention of a gentleman in a law firm.
Yes. I worked for legal services for almost 2 years. Then I moved over and became an assistant chief prosecutor in the circuit courts. At that point, Connecticut had a very interesting, different level of courts. The circuit court was the lowest court, but it actually had criminal and civil jurisdiction. Then there was the Court of Common Pleas, then there was the Superior Court, and at the top was the Supreme Court. So I worked early on in the circuit courts, first as a public defender and then as a prosecutor doing gambling and narcotics prosecutions with a guy named Arnold Markle, who was probably one of the best teachers I've ever known, and probably his whole life he wanted to be the state's attorney for New Haven. And eventually he tried the Bobby Seale case way back when, so he got to be famous. I'd left his office by then. But I was getting ready to go to Boston to take a job with some entity. And I got a call from a law school classmate, Howard Slater, who said, "You come up to Hartford and talk to Ribicoff and Kotkin. We might hire you." So I went up on a Saturday. I remember it was Arnold, my boss's son's bar mitzvah was that day. So I went to this Jewish law firm and interviewed and told them I had double parked and I needed to leave fairly early because I had to go to a bar mitzvah. I think I got the job then. And I went to work for Ribicoff and Kotkin, the first black attorney in a firm larger than 5 in the history of the state of Connecticut. And we proposed to the partners, Ribicoff and Kotkin, that we would write a partnership agreement that would protect them for the rest of their lives. We did. It did. They looked at us and said, get out. So that firm promptly came to an end at that point. It's worth knowing, by the way, that way back when I joined there, maybe 2 years before I joined Ribicoff and Kotkin, Congress had passed some legislation that said if you had a congressman or a senator in your law firm name, you had to take the name out. So the Ribicoff would have had to go, except he had a brother. So we kept the Ribicoff and Kotkin name, made a lot of money off that name. It was a wonderful law firm. Except the two partners were not interested in having partners. So I left, and we founded, 9 of us, founded a firm called Loudon, Byrne, Sheckman, Slater, and Rose. And we set up down the street from where Ribicoff and Kotkin was. I don't think I've ever made more money in my life than that firm made. We went from 9 to 28. We're doing brilliantly, making all kinds of interesting work and setting the world on fire relative to new firms. And then 1984 came.
Well, what was your practice at the firm that you founded?
I was a litigator. I did criminal, I did civil, I did appellate work, I did everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed it. I tried a case involving a young black truck driver who was a captain in the Black Panthers. And it was a gun case in the circuit court. We won the case. I got a letter from the Chicago office of the Black Panthers congratulating me on the win and telling me that as far as they were concerned, I could represent them in the lower courts.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
And then what happened with this firm?
Well, on this day in 1984, I was called in by the way, it's worth noting that it was Loudon, Byrne, Sheckman, Slater, and Rose. Loudon had left, Sheckman had left, they'd gone on to other firms. So the name became just a two-person name. Byrne and Slater was the name of it. Mm-hmm. And Byrne and Slater called me in and said to me they didn't think that a black man could make it as a commercial litigator in Connecticut.
Even though you already had...
I had a case where I had very recently gotten a $43 million prejudgment remedy in a very fascinating commercial case. So they invited me to leave. And there I was. I had a wife, a house, 2 kids, and no job. The gentleman who I had the $43 million prejudgment remedy for was a guy named Joseph P. Vetrano, who was an institution. At Tomato Farms in Italy, he took Governor Grasso, Ella Grasso, took her to Italy with her husband, and they stayed in this inn that was owned by one of Joe's best friends. And Ella Grasso, being Ella Grasso, every night she would wash her underwear and her husband's underwear and hang them out the window of the inn. Which didn't sit really well with the guy who owned it. He talked to Joe, but the governor did what she was going to do. Anyway, Joe Vetrano became my let's help John Rose find a job person. Joe had an apartment in the Watergate in Washington. He was a really interesting dude, and he knew everybody. So he took me to the White House, the Reagan administration. And there was a guy from Brown University who was a good friend of his, working in the White House, and we went back and forth. I got to meet all kinds of wonderful people in the administration, and I was offered a job for $75,000 a year, because you don't make your money in Washington as a person working for the government. You make your money when you leave and go to one of the big giant law firms with all that phenomenal knowledge that you've accumulated that they can use. So I told Washington, 75, I got to live here. I got a call sometime in 1984 from a law firm in Farming, and actually they were in West Hartford at that point. I went to work for them, and that firm became, Levy and Droney was the name of it when it started. It became, I'm sorry, it was not. It was not. It was Talo, Levy, Mandel, and Costin.
Yes.
Right. And I went to work for Talo, Levy, Mandel, and Costin. We had an office first in West Hartford, moved to Farmington, had a couple of offices there. Eventually merged with John Droney's firm, which caused the firm to grow precipitously. I think we went from 12 or 15 lawyers to something in excess of 60 at some point, making real money, doing all kinds of wonderful things. But Catherine came to work there at some point. And I'd been telling people about Catherine. I'd known her for a while. There was this black woman from Alaska who used to jump out of helicopters and go skiing. And besides which, she's really bright, and we ought to hire her.
Yeah, John, you keep telling that lie. I've never jumped out of a helicopter.
But
I have gone backcountry skiing, which requires you to get in a helicopter and step out of a helicopter. But I never jumped out of a helicopter, just so we're clear. That's right.
and you skied down frozen waterfalls.
That is true.
So I was there 19 years from when I left. When I started in 1984, I was there until 2004. I got a call from a lawyer at a medium-sized firm in Hartford, Shipman and Goodwin, I think. It was probably not medium-sized, probably big. And he said that the mayor of Hartford was looking for a corporation counsel to come work the city. And would I help him find one? I said, sure. I hung up my phone, did nothing for 2 weeks, got another call from Robert Simpson. And I said, okay, how about me? So there I was now staring at the prospect of leaving this firm where I'd been for 19 years to go work for the city of Hartford to become corporation counsel. Fascinating, interesting job. I had a charter that said the corporation counsel office shall be 15 lawyers. I got there were 7, never got above 9, got down to as few as 5. I hired a lot of really wonderfully talented black women, as it turns out, from UConn Law School, and we made it through and made the Corporation Counsel's office, in my opinion, way better than it had ever been before. Eddie Perez was a spectacularly wonderful mayor to work for, way brighter than anybody's ever given him credit for. So that was, 6 years at Corporation Counsel in Hartford. Then I went to work for a black-owned firm. It was total, utter disaster. Fortunately, I had my own little practice going on the side. And I got a call from New Haven. Wouldn't I like to come down and be corporation counsel in New Haven? I said, sure. So 2015, I went to work for Tony Harp in New Haven. For 6 months, I commuted from Hartford to New Haven. Not a fun thing to do.
Oh, I did it for 20 years.
Yeah, I know. But at some point, I hired Catherine as a deputy in the Corporation Counsel office in New Haven. It was a good job.
John, I just, many of the years that I spent in a car with John were going to CBA meetings.
Oh, yes.
The first, it was the Committee on Diversity, I think it was. The Committee to Promote Diversity. I don't exactly remember the name, I'm sorry. But we went to a lot of meetings talking about how to attract people of color to Connecticut and to Connecticut law firms, and for not only recruitment but retention and promotion. And I think it's important for purposes of capturing history for people to understand how much time John Rose spent figuring out how to create opportunities for young black women, young black men, frankly, people of color, not just black people, people of color.
There's an entity that still exists. It's now called the George Crawford Black Lawyers Association. When I got to Hartford, I tried to create with the black lawyers in New Haven. And New Haven had a small coterie of like 5, 6, 7 black lawyers most of them were in solo practice situations. I tried to put them together, and all of the new people who were only interested in becoming judges, and I can't help you there. Anyway, I went to Hartford, and there was a group of young people who were coming into the practice at that point. Joe Moniz at Dayberry and Howard, Sandy Cloud at Robinson and Cole, several women. There was a black woman law professor from Quinnipiac. We put together something called, I named it, the George W. Crawford Law Association. No, black came later. And it was dedicated literally to making opportunity for young people of color to become associated with one another, to talk the law, to learn the law, to be better than they were before. And it's lasted a long time. I named it after, pardon? Joe was the first president. I was like second or third. I think Alan Green may have been second president. But it was created literally for the reason that it still exists. And I named it after Crawford because, without doing any research, I'd met George Crawford on a street one day. He was, let's see, he started out as Booker T. Washington's houseboy in Talladega, Alabama. He went to college there, applied to 2 law schools, Harvard and Yale, got into both, took a steamship to New Haven, and practiced law there till he was 98 years old. He was a very special man, this very tall, handsome, eloquent man in wonderful clothing, would walk the streets of New Haven. I met him one day, and it was intimidating. But when I got to naming we were trying to find a name for the organization, I figured he went to Yale, graduated in 1906. He must have been the first one. We'll take that name. So we adopted that name. Turns out the first graduate of Yale Law School was in 1880, and I'm not sure that's even right, because he was the first black graduate of law school who took the Connecticut bar and passed it. Whether there were blacks who never took the Connecticut bar who'd gone to Yale, I don't know. But at this point, there's an award named for this gentleman who went to back to Richmond and did abolitionist newspaper work. I'll tell you the fun story. Joe Moniz, Sandy Cloud, and I were the 3 black lawyers in major law firms back then. There was an association of the 17 or 18 largest law firms in the state, and they would meet, believe it or not, they would meet in Hartford at the Institute for the Living. On this day, they'd been talking about for months the whole issue of how to run a law firm, what issues were up and down, whatever. And they came to, let's talk about minority lawyers. And it was a room full of 17 or 18 or 19 white men. And so they called Joe and Sandy and me, and we went and met with them. And we put together something called the Connecticut Lawyers Group. I think that was what it was called the first time around. And each of the firms made a commitment to the effect of hiring for at least the summer, and you could always hire a first-year law student for the summer because you didn't have to give him a job. He or she was going back to law school. All the firms committed to hiring one. That developed into a significantly larger, more interesting thing because young black people, young black men and women, suddenly decided to come to Hartford. And there were 50 or 60 at one point at one place, in all the places. And you went to one of those firms, one of the...
I was the first one at that firm, and that was a result of that commitment.
A lot of the firms were not ready. The best example I can give you, Catherine can give it. Well, we definitely yours. I went to school with a guy named Bill Breitz, who lived in my neighborhood and was a good friend, worked for one of those firms. And at that point, the firms really had committed to do lots of things, including bringing in talented people to talk to them about how you deal with black people. You all who've never dealt with black people before. And Bill was telling me the senior partner in his firm, after this woman came down and presented for 2 or 3 days on how to integrate a firm, he's walking down the hallway with his senior partner. He was saying, no black bank is going to tell me how to run my law firm. So he left that law firm. We got better. We did marvelous, wonderful things as the Crawford Association. But we got better than that because Stop and Shop became a client of mine because they'd been a client of Ribicoff and Kotkins. One day I was sitting in the office and I was talking to the general counsel of Stop and Shop, a guy named Peter Phillips. Stop and Shop had an in-house law firm, was probably the most integrated entity you ever saw in your life. It was amazing. They had 10 or 12 lawyers of every color, every size, every gender. Amazing, good place. And he said to me, you guys are doing this thing in Connecticut. You need to come to Boston and meet this woman who runs something called the Boston Lawyers Group. And she's been doing it for a while. You should just talk to her. So I drove to Boston and met at Peter's office, and we went across the way and met with Carolyn Hebsgaard. Brilliant person. We're talking at lunch. We finished, and I looked at her and I said, you don't work on Thursdays and Fridays. You could come to Connecticut and run this program for us. She did. That became the Lawyers Collaborative for Diversity. Carolyn was the executive director forever. The plot was much like it was done in Boston. She would be given office space in one of the large firms that would last 1 or 2 years. They'd provide her with staff, and she would run all of the programming that had to do with making the law firm a better place for young people of color. She did that in Connecticut for, 12, 10, 15, however.
It's got to be longer than that.
10, I mean, it does seem like forever. I should do the
I
math
think she
in
was
my
doing it
head.
as long as I was general counsel. That'd be 20 years.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So
She retired from both jobs last year. We made over the scene in Connecticut. We brought people from literally all over the country. I had the very good fortune to know a U.S. Senator, Lowell Weicker, who I put a young black man in his office who worked there for 10 years. He loved him. He called me one day and said, do you want to be on the Judicial Selection Commission? I said, sure. Turned out there were 5 firms, all big white firms, and the people from those firms who were on the commissions would rotate. If a guy was on the State's Attorney's Commission, he decided he wanted me to do on judicial selection, he would just move when there was an opening. And they were running this little crypt forever, I think. But anyway, on this occasion, one of them was getting ready to leave. He was in one of the big firms, and he said, to Lowell Weicker, find somebody. Lowell found me. We were good friends. I took a job as the first black on the Judicial Selection Commission and did that for several years. I'm happy to say probably made 10 or 12 black lawyers. First 6 months I was on the commission, we saw one woman. She was totally unqualified. And the commission was I think 6 lawyers and 6 citizens. They weren't seeing a whole lot of black people. I read the statute that created it, and it said literally I could ask people to come. And I went and interviewed as many people as I could find who I knew were, I thought, possible potential applicants. And at least one of them is now a federal judge. The assistant U.S. attorney, now the U.S. attorney for the state of Connecticut is one of them. Some really spectacular, wonderful people have come through. The Judicial Commission has had Selection Commission has had a black woman as its chair in the time that's happened since then. Luby Harper, who went on to the state Supreme Court, was one of the people that I recruited. We made some changes and made a difference in the state judicial system, I'm happy to say.
Well, I think it's important, again, for historical purposes, for people to know that, John, you've done so many things in your 80 years, 80 plus years.
Thank you. Unfortunately, there is a plus there.
Yeah, keep more pluses to come. But you've created opportunities. Not only did you create opportunities for yourself, and you have fought some of the great fights for your family, for the city of New Haven, for the city of Hartford, for your clients. But you've also fought the great fight here in Connecticut and changing the landscape of not only law firms, but our judicial branch.
Yeah.
Connecticut got stuck with me for 20 years in state government, making a difference. I think I made a difference as well. And I'm going to leave it to you to say what else you want to talk about.
I'm going to write I'm not sure it's a book, and I really probably need to find a ghostwriter because I'm ferociously lazy. But I got tons and tons of notes on my own life and the stuff that I've been and done, and it's a good story, and so much of it's true.
So, John, I just want to talk a little bit more about, how the creation of the then George W. Crawford Law Association expanded into other affinity bars. I mean, we did include all people of color, but
Yes.
Eventually there were other affinity bars.
It's probably the thing that I'm most proud of in terms of development. That is to say, all of the associated or bar associations that have come into existence, which continue to exist to this day, and represent the young lawyers of color from practically every nation, every style that you can imagine. That's a wonderful thing. There's the Latin. I've got to get the names right.
There's the Latin American Bar Association, South Asian
Bar Association. I mean,
there's also Asian.
Yep.
Yep.
It's a wonderful thing. It's one of the best things that's ever happened, in my opinion, to the bar associations of this state, that the young people of every ilk have come together and formed organizations that they can swear their allegiance to and make life better amongst each other for.
Another thing I think that it's worth capturing is that these affinity associations are also great for recruiting purposes.
Absolutely.
And making sure that the word gets out there for law firms and corporations, cities, state government, looking to make sure that they hire and recruit from the broadest pool of candidates.
And the fact that they've literally taken root in all of the law schools in the state and are making opportunities for one another is just a special, incredible, wonderful thing that I'm glad to have any kind of association with. I think that every law firm of any consequence in this state at this point is a better place because of the affinity bar associations, because of the coming together of young men and women of every nationality and color, and a place to make the law a better place to be at and to practice about.
So once again, John Rose, changing the landscape in Connecticut.